Hello and welcome to the Unlocking Behaviour Change podcast, the show all about psychology and changing behaviour. My name is Jamie West. I'm a writer, performer and musician, and I am joined by Professor Emeritus Robert West. How are you, Robert?
I'm good.
Yes?
That was quiet. Is there someone else in the room with you? You're trying to not wake up.
No, I'm talking in my radio voice into the microphone. And when you listen back, you'll be surprised at how pleasant that sound. The listener would have been thinking, this is better than usual, not worse than usual.
Lovely.
You see?
Lovely. And I've just ruined it.
That's right. Now you've drawn so much attention over to it. I could talk really loudly from back here if that's what you want. So anyway, we are talking about decision-making in this season. And we are now going to move on to talking about emotions. And suddenly I have a desire to sing that Bee Gees song about emotions, but I don't want to pay any royalties. So you can just imagine that song if you know it. It's quite a nice song.
If you don't know it, it's a bit problematic.
Well, you can think of another song that has emotions as part of it and enjoy that in your mind.
Every song.
Okay, so where shall we start on this one? Strangely, if you look at the literature on decision-making, as I understand it, we used to believe in the academic field, and I say we, meaning you, because I'm not in the academic field. We used to think that humans were sort of purely rational decision-makers. Can that be right? Did we used to have models that thought that? It seems crazy now.
There were models that proposed that. I don't think anyone actually thought it because that would be ridiculous. So, you go back all the way through history, human history and writings of the ancient philosophers and so on. And very obviously, in all cultures that I'm aware of anyway, where we have a written record, from the earliest of times, there's been a recognition that in the human experience, there is the rational and there's the emotional. There's the horse and the rider, as I've sometimes alluded it to, or the rider and the elephant, and there's the head and the heart, and so on. So I think humans, for eons, have recognized these two sides of our nature.
So what, just for people who don't know, I'm sure that many will, but the rider and the horse metaphor, just what is that? Yeah,
so this is something we allude to in our books on motivation, Energize and React, and actually is a fundamental underpinning of a lot of what we've been writing about, which is this recognition in our brain. We have a lot of the processes going on that we share with other species, habitual, emotional, drive processes, and so on, that are very similar, not identical, but they're very similar to other species because we evolved, from being a non-sapient to being sapient. And then, as humans, we have evolved this more rational side, this ability to form propositions about things, to think about these sorts of things. And in the COM-B, capability, opportunity, motivation, behavior model, we make a distinction between reflective and automatic motivation. In the prime theory of motivation, we refer to our plans and our evaluations as things that are part of our sort of so-called rational brain or our thoughtful brain, and desires and instincts and habits and impulses and so on as that and a part of the animal brain. So the horse and the rider concept reflects the idea that the rider doesn't get to control directly where the horse goes. The rider's sitting on top and has to communicate through the horse in order to go in one direction or another. And with humans, the basic principle there is that the clever part of our brain doesn't get to control our behavior directly. It has to do it through the animal part of our brain. What that means is, in very sort of prosaic terms, for example, that it doesn't matter what you think you should do if it doesn't get the animal part of your brain to want or need to do it. And there's various tricks and things that we use as humans to achieve that. One of those is identity. where something that is quite an abstract concept that's related to, justice and all the rest of it, and things that are related to the clever part of our brain, the rider, come to matter to us enormously and create strong desires, feelings of need and want, by virtue of the fact that they connect with our views about who we are and what we're about, our core values and so on. So that's the basic idea of the horse and the rider.
So what we think is not that important if it doesn't affect our body, this the animal part of us, the part that really is going to control our limbs and get us walking to the gym. You really need to be talking to that part of yourself, and you have to want to do that. But it's quite interesting that our identity feeds into that animal self so strongly, because identity is seems like almost a linguistic concept in some ways. I am part of this tribe, and that tribe might have a name. So therefore, what is a country? It's it's sort of artificial in many ways. So I'm quite intrigued by that idea that our identity has such a strong impact on our animal impulses. And it clearly does, because when our identity is threatened, we are threatened, or we feel threatened.
Yeah. And I think it's a very interesting question, which I can't say that we have the answer to, as to why and how that evolved as to be the case. But you could certainly make a case for the idea that in the process of evolving our sapient, that is our self-reflective, thoughtful selves, evolution had to have a system to connect that with our muscles and our actions and so on, because it couldn't sort of forge a whole brand new pathway which bypassed our animal brain. It had to build on top of it, and because as a social animal, our in-group, our out-group, our identity in relation to others and so on is such an important aspect of our survival and the survival of our genes, that influence of identity on our desires had to sort of go hand in hand. So the evolution process, as it was evolving our sapient selves, evolved our identity, the connection between our thoughts about ourselves, in that sense, our identity, and those desires. That's a hypothesis. I'm not sure it's testable. But it's some kind of explanation.
Well, somebody go out there and test that, find a way to test it, get back to us, and we'll have you on the podcast.
Absolutely.
You can explain it.
You'll probably get a Nobel Prize before we have you on the podcast.
Well, we're getting the Nobel Prize first.
Yeah,
I think we've established that earlier on in the season. So emotions are central to the choices that we make, aren't they? If we don't have an emotional connection to the choices, then I suppose we're unlikely to make them? That's sort of a question.
Not necessarily. So I think that if you remember going right back to the beginning of the facet model and the framing, one of the things that we pointed out, and it is important, is that decisions come to us in three main guises: threats, opportunities, and tasks. Now, threats and opportunities very often do involve, yes, emotions and so on. But we also, as humans, have tasks. We're given things we've got to do. We're not massively emotionally engaged with them, but we've got a job to do. We get it done. And so there will be a lot of the decisions that we make in our work lives and so on, where it would be, really stretching it to think that, these are being driven by emotions. They're being driven by the fact that we've set ourselves a goal and we're working towards whatever that goal was. Now, that's not to say that in that situation, emotions couldn't play a role, because very often they do. So, for example, if your task is to fly an aircraft and you are coming into land, at some level, you're going to feel the level of anxiety. It doesn't really matter how experienced you are as a pilot. There will be some level of anxiety which will be influencing the way that you go about things. And that will influence the decision-making process. It's not necessarily influencing what goes into the decision, the sort of pros and cons analysis, but it will influence your level of arousal, the extent to the extent to which, for example, you're susceptible to a startle reflex. If you're starting with a reasonably high level of anxiety and then something happens as you're coming into land, for example, there was nothing particularly emotional about any of this. You're just doing a job, but you've got slightly elevated level of arousal and anxiety. And then, you hear a loud bang, startle reflex. That then, can have a massive effect on what happens next in terms of the way you make the decision. So I guess what I'm saying is that emotions can play a role in every decision. They can play a role in every decision. Some decisions that we make, they're not part of the content of that decision. They're not saying, I'm going to do this because this will make me feel better or worse or whatever. They're just a job that you've got to do. But they can nevertheless influence the way that you analyze the information, whereas lots of other decisions that we make, emotions are part of the content. You're trying to make yourself feel better or worse, or avoid feeling worse.
It makes me think of adverts. I've been thinking that every advert is almost every advert that you see is along the lines of, I'm going to make you feel bad now, but don't worry, I've got a way to make you feel better. Buy this. And that is not the only way you can sell stuff, but it's such a common way. And it's a very strange sort of dynamic someone is playing with you, where they frighten you and then relieve that fear in one sentence to the next. And that this person that you're dealing with, or group of people who are advertising to you, it's interesting that we do feel frightened. We don't sort of, obviously we know what advertising is. We know it's playing on us, but the fear, even if it's very low level, can still get aroused, that fear. And then, I better do this thing, or I better do something like that.
It is absolutely the classic way of motivating people. As you say, it's not the only way by any means, but it is an important one. As an advertiser, where if you're going to do that, or someone marketing a product, you have to judge it really well. You have to know the extent to which you can do this with your audience, because if you set the threat level as too high, then people will find the whole thing aversive, and they probably turn off even or switch their attention away. So
I don't like watching daytime TV adverts. When in the middle of countdown or something. Getting ready for death, are you? Well,
I'm afraid that is a consequence of daytime TV, because they know their market. I'm getting advertised funeral plans, stair lifts, because I watch, things like Bergerac or Murder, She Wrote or something like that.
I've been watching Murder, She Wrote. That's good. Anyway, carry on. Sorry.
So let's say you are a marketer, or I'm not really interested, to be honest, in helping marketers do their job. I'm more interested in helping people doing mass media campaigns to make people's lives better, do theirs. But typically what you've got to pay a lot of attention to is, if you are going to raise a level of concern, ethically, it's not, you don't want to be scaring the pants off people. That was an issue that came up in COVID, and the government was accused of doing this quite incorrectly. The government's campaigns weren't designed to do that. They were designed to create an appropriate level of concern, so people actually took the action that was necessary. So you've got to raise the level of concern to a point that people are motivated to pay attention to what they can do about it, and then very, very rapidly help people to alleviate that concern. Say, it's okay, don't worry about it. You can sort it out by doing this. Very often that level of concern or fear or anxiety, these are all basically the same thing, the same dimension, but with different sort of cognitive interpretations. Very, very often, I think it needs to be pretty low. It needs to be comfortable, and barely perceptible. There's this concept in emotions and decision-making of kind of like micro emotions and micro decisions. And the idea is that you barely even notice that it's there, so that you're not getting too worked up about it. But at the same time, it's enough to motivate you to pay attention and to look at what opportunities are being given for resolving a potential threat that might be there.
So fear is an interesting emotion when it comes to making decisions in general, because fear can create a kind of tunnel vision. When you're in a heightened state of fear, people can often panic, which is often not a good response. I'm yet to find a really good place for panic in my life. I mean, I know I quickly have to get out the way of a car if it's coming towards me, or a bike. I don't know if I feel panicked per se. I'd more likely feel panicked thinking afterwards, oh my God, something bad nearly happened to me. But the instinct to get out of the way. But I'm yet to find a very good use for panic. But yet fear does induce panic. And then we flit between decisions, don't we? Go, oh, should we do this or do that? And then we're sort of closed down in some ways.
Yeah. So in the absolutely brilliant model of decision-making, or theory of decision-making called conflict theory by Irving Janis and Robert Mann, M-A-N-N and J-A-N-I-S, in the book Decision Making.
Good title.
It is a great title. I'm not sure it's still in print, but you can still get it. It's just brilliant. What they do is very much focus on as a counterbalance to what you were saying right at the beginning of people thinking of decision making as a purely rational process, cold rational process that people weigh up pros and cons. They were saying, no. Decisions are, the real important decisions often involve serious conflicts and emotions and so on. What they say, and with evidence, is that when you're faced with particular kinds of fearful situations, then you can respond in a number of different ways. One is this thing that you're talking about, which is tunnel vision. You just become completely focused on one thing, and you can't look outside that very narrow window to look at what other options are available. You just keep going down that road, regardless of the fact it may be leading you to disaster. And the other approach, which you also mentioned, which is a different type of approach, but to similar kind of scenario, is you and what happens. This occurs when there's no option that doesn't seem to have some bad outcome attached to it. You flit like a headless chicken from one to the other, back to the first, back to the second, and so on, until time runs out or you crash or whatever it is that you're doing. So those two responses to high stress environments in decision making are the tunnel vision one and the headless chicken one, and both of those are maladaptive. Obviously, just to complete the picture, what Janis and Mann are proposing, and in the facet model, we're definitely following their lead on this, is that the optimal level of decision making is what they call vigilant decision making. It's not complacent. It's not saying, oh, everything's fine, we don't have to worry about it. It's having an appropriate level of arousal, an appropriate level of concern or excitement about an opportunity to the task in hand, which gives you the optimum level required for the kind of cognitive processing that's needed to undertake the task. And this is where we come back to the very famous law of the relationship between arousal and cognitive performance, which is the Yerkes-Dodson Law, Yerkes-Dodson law, which is that for any task, there is an optimum level of physiological arousal for that task. And for tasks that are very simple, then you're looking for a relatively high level of arousal in order to keep performing that task well. And for tasks that are more complicated, you want a lower level of arousal. beautiful. I mean, it's such an important and generalizable law when we're talking about decision making.
Why would we need a higher level of physiological arousal dealing with a simple task? I mean, I'm thinking of when I worked at the library, I had to put books back on a shelf in the right place. And a high level of physiological arousal would have been fairly useless to me at that moment.
Arguably not. I mean, obviously not that high, but you can get high, you could, for any task you can be too high. But if you think about the sort of classic situation is you're a radar operator and you're sitting there waiting for a blip on the screen, which may never come, which tells you that there's an incoming intercontinental ballistic missile. And you've got to be vigilant. You've got to stay
This
there.
is a high-stakes scenario. I mean, there were no missiles in the library that I worked at. I don't know what kind of libraries you go to.
This is true. That is a high-stakes side. Or let's say someone operating looking at the X-ray machine in an airport or whatever. Anyway,
Still in a life or death.
All right.
Still in a life or death scenario. I guess I'm saying surely there are times when you have a simple task that you can do with low arousal as well.
I'm not saying that you it requires a high level of arousal, or even that it's better for your peace of mind for it to have a higher level of arousal. But actually, you'd be surprised. I mean, putting books back on the shelf requires you to look at the Dewey code. Is it Dewey? What are they?
Dewey Decimal
System code and get it right each time. Otherwise.
That's if you care about your job. You see, I just put them back anywhere.
I'm sure you didn't. But anyway, the point I'm going to make to Jamie is that in these kind of simple tasks, optimal performance often requires rapid reactions. Okay, and rapid reactions for simple tasks are facilitated by higher levels of arousal.
I tell you, the other thing it made me think of was that I was watching an interview with the ex-England cricketer Stuart Broad, and he was talking about this. They were saying the kind of physiological arousal level that you might have going onto the field. And if you're going on as a bowler, as he was primarily a bowler, he would say, okay, they might actually take some gum that had caffeine in it and they want to be pumped up because they're coming in, they're bowling fast, and they want to be, really raring. Whereas if you're coming out as a batsman who is facing maybe a 90 mile per hour ball, actually you want to be as calm as you possibly can. So your example or what you were talking about there made me think of that.
Beautiful example. And of course, unsurprising in a way, because sports science has very much embodied and is very much aware of the Yerkes-Dodson Law. Whether or not they know the name of it, it is such a pervasive phenomenon. I'm happy to hear that it's sort of verbalized in that way by someone at the top of their game. There are other situations like in musical performances. If it's a very complicated piece, you don't want to be absolutely, totally laid back. I can remember one friend of mine who was a classical musician. I won't say any more so that the person can't be identified, but who, in my opinion, was way too calm as a performer. And I thought, well, okay, I think you could sort of, you could kind of up the arousal level a bit for yourself, because your performance is sort of lacking a little bit in but you really don't want to be too highly aroused, because you simply can't perform at a high level in music if you're too aroused.
Well, when I saw the Dalai Lama at the O2 Arena, there's a sentence you weren't expecting to hear on this podcast.
Who was he playing with? And was he doing his own stuff?
he was playing with
covers?
Jethro Tull. And he had a very, very low level of arousal, as you might expect from a Dalai Lama and someone who meditates an awful lot. And, as a performer, that was not very effective in maintaining a certain kind of interest in the audience, even though he has a lot of great and interesting stuff to say. He's a very interesting guy. But I do remember thinking, actually, you need to be a little bit more up than this, Mr. Dalai Lama.
Yeah, absolutely.
With all due respect.
Any performers out there, you might want to, if you feel really, really comfortable in front of an audience, you might just want to feel a little less comfortable to up your game a bit.
Okay, anyway, we are amazingly out of time for this episode, and we're just starting to scratch the surface of emotions, so we will be coming back to this next time. So it remains for me to say thank you very much, Robert.
Oh, well, thank you, Jamie.
And thank you for listening wherever you are, and we look forward to joining you. I've gone quiet. We look forward to joining you next time on the Unlocking Behaviour Change podcast.
Good night, everybody. Good night.